before we begin the session? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening session. I know it's cricket season again with IPL on, but if there's one subject that is as hotly discussed as cricket in India, it is education. Very early into his job, Mr. Kapil Sibal, the Union Human Resources Development Minister, realized that truism. He himself said, I think, that there are 1.1 billion opinions about how to run education in this country, as many as there are people in this country. Kapil Sibal has been breaking news ever since he took over, keeping the media constantly on its toes. We have a saying, and he's got a unique style, where he first issues this fantastic amount of declarations, and then there's a lot of clarifications that follow, Kapil. But forgive the metaphor, but for the first 3 months, you had a lot of sweeping to do. You had to sweep every cobweb and clear out every corner of the Human Resources Development Ministry, and you've done a superb job of it, being the ministry's Safai Karamchari in chief. You have impacted education as few have done so in the recent past. You have brought much needed reform and examination, doing away with the 10th boards, and I can tell you my daughter is very unhappy that it didn't happen. She's passed out of college, and she's very, very unhappy that she wasn't in school when you made this. My son is still in school, so he's very happy. You've also moved the historic Right to Free Education bill, and though we're not sure how it's going to be implemented, and that's something you can tell us about. Most importantly, you've brought major reform to higher education, and I hear there are 4 bills that are to be passed soon, which is going to change the face of university and higher education in this country. But you've also learned to grapple with plenty of issues, like the salary structure of IIT professors, which we know you've been embroiled with. Also, India is a country full of paradoxes. Even as we have a phenomenal number of schools being set up, colleges, universities, illiteracy rates in this country are among the highest. India has one of the largest pool of engineering students, and yet, if you listen to every industry, there is a yawning skill gap. Even as problematic is that, though the states may not agree, education is a state subject. So what the center directs and what Mr. Sibal does, the states don't always do. But Kapil Sibal is a harbinger of change. He has always been an achiever. After a degree of arts from St. Stephen's College, and then a law degree, he went on to the Harvard Law School, until recently was a highly successful lawyer. He then joined politics and is a 2-time MP from Chandni Chowk. Being a lawyer, we all know how persuasive a speaker he is. So Kapil, go ahead and shoot.
Thank you, Raj. Good evening, everybody. I just look at that poster, a decade of infinite possibilities, century. We are confronted with a collapsing past and an uncertain future. All the methodologies of the past have collapsed. Even the politics has changed. The Cold War has ended, the Berlin Wall fell. Technology has changed. Globalization has brought countries together, peoples together. And we are all moving towards a borderless world. And when I say a borderless world, we are trying to reduce through global negotiations, multilateral negotiations. We are trying to reduce trade barriers. We're trying on the agenda of the WTO is how, there should be greater movement of people from one place to another. As it is, you have global companies located somewhere, but manufacturing somewhere else, providing services somewhere else. That's also true of the service sector. So all that has changed. The demographics of the global community is fast changing. And you are also confronted with issues that have never confronted the world before. For the first time since civilization, you are confronted with the reality of finite resources which cannot possibly satisfy the consumption patterns of a highly capitalist global economy. So with climate change, global warming, populations moving from a 6.2 billion at the moment to 8.9 billion in times to come, scarcity of water, food security, which is a global issue, and demographic change, you have a new world, like never before. And so you need those possibilities, you need those infinite possibilities to conquer the challenges of tomorrow. How will that happen? That's the big question. There will be no conquests, clearly. I hope, and I firmly believe there will be no nuclear wars. There will be no occupation of territories. So how will the global community meet this challenge? And I respectfully submit to this audience that it will meet this challenge through what I call intangible assets. Wealth consists of two parts: tangible assets and intangible assets. A tangible asset is one that you can put value to, you can touch, you can feel, you can see. And the market determines the value of that tangible asset. But the wealth of a nation no longer in the 21st century will depend on tangible assets. And therefore, if you look at the balance sheet of corporations, you don't find that there is so much investment in land, in property, and factories and buildings. They've started investing in intellectual property, which is an intangible asset. So the wealth of corporations, the wealth of nations, will depend on what I call intangible assets. Our culture is an intangible asset. That's part of our wealth. We never recognize it. We never look upon it as an aspect of wealth. Our music, our classical dances, our history, our temples, our monuments are all, in a sense, intangible assets because they are surrounded by our scriptures, are huge tangible assets. But what it lacks is the intangibility of the wealth that comes from history and culture. It comes from knowledge. And knowledge is at the heart of making an intangible asset. And I would suggest to you that if any nation wants to be really wealthy, and not just wealthy in terms of tangible assets, but wealthy in terms of nationhood, then it needs and must invest in knowledge. And knowledge means investing in our children, who will then grow up to be thoughtful, tolerant, innovative children who will then build through the intellectual assets that they have, assets for the nation. And when I look upon education, I look upon that really determining India's future. And our GDP growth rate of the double digit that we plan to have and we dream of cannot happen unless we invest and allow children to create those intangible assets which truly will become the wealth of the nation. And so as a policy maker and as a nation, we must look at education in that context. Then only will we as a nation be able to move forward. Now, where is wealth really created? What's the foundation of that wealth? And the foundation of that wealth, like the foundation of a tangible asset, is primary and secondary education. That's where you lay the foundations of responsive, creative citizens of this country. And unless we ensure that there is a critical mass of children who actually move from school to college, we'll not have the kind of people which will be able to create the wealth that I'm talking about. And so I think, from my point of view, the most important piece of legislation which we have passed in Parliament is the Right to Education Act, because for the first time in the history of our country, we have, at least the state has committed that it shall ensure access to all children living in India to a schooling which is of quality. Now, somebody mentioned, Raj, you mentioned that education is a state subject. It isn't. It is a concurrent subject. It became a concurrent subject in 1976. Prior to that, it was a state subject. And so the center and the state government have concurrent powers over education. So that's why we are able to pass a Right to Education Act, which will bind all state governments, which we would not have been able to do prior to 1976. Of course, we took the consent of states. We had a dialogue with the states. But when there is a parliamentary law which is passed, that any school act, the provisions of which are inconsistent with any aspect of any part of the parliamentary law, those provisions will be, in a sense, eclipsed by the parliamentary law. The parliamentary law will override those provisions. So the Right to Education Act now enjoins the state governments to have what is called a neighborhood school. In other words, every neighborhood must have a school. Any community or part of a community, if they feel that they do not have access to a school, now have not just a statutory right under the Right to Education Act, but a constitutional right under Article 21A of the Constitution to have access to schooling and quality schooling. Quality schooling, why? Because we have prescribed under the Act the minimum requirements that a teacher must possess, the minimum qualifications that a teacher must possess if he or she wants to teach. And in the event that teacher does not possess those qualifications, we have a time lag of about 5 years in which we ask the teacher to actually acquire those qualifications. And in the event he or she does not, then that teacher will not be accepted under the Act as a person who is entitled to teach children. We're trying to ensure